if you can indulge me just a quick second here. I just want to recognize Francie. Today, she celebrates 35 years at the City of Mercer Island. She started when she was 15. Thank you, Francie, for all your loyal and dedicated service. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, it is super impressive, and I'm so sorry that you are celebrating it here tonight with us.
Okay, folks, welcome to a continuation of the budget review process. We'll be focusing on the CIP, which is a 6-year program, but in particular, the 2-year portion of the capital budget portion of the 6-year CIP. Your agenda is before you here. Francie and I will quickly review CIP revenue sources very quickly. I'll do it by fund, and Francie will update you on the REIT forecast and utility rate recommendations per the utility board and per staff. Then we'll quickly go over the CIP, give you a summarized review, 30,000-foot review in terms of the 6-year plan by project category, by funding status. We'll boil it down to the capital budget 19 and 20 by project category and funding status, and then show you the projected ending fund balances for the 6-year period for the capital-related funds. Then we'll get into the meat of this, which is really about the project review by category for 19 and 20. That's where we'll spend most of our time. I'll quickly update you, as we did 2 years ago, on where our outstanding bonds are at and when they end. And then the one capital budget policy change, which I noted in your agenda bill. And finally, we'll just touch base with the council. Are there any additional information the council wants when we get back together on the 20th, or any specific direction? Okay. Revenue sources. So I'll just hit 4 funds or groups of funds real quickly. And I've just listed these from highest to lowest. The street fund. This is about your street projects, pedestrian bicycle facilities, and any parking related stuff. REIT is your largest funding source. The projection for 19 and 20 is $1.8 million a year. After that is fuel tax, just under $500,000 a year. Then vehicle license fees, $375,000 a year. Sound transit mitigation, what's budgeted is about $338,000 a year. Impact fees, transportation impact fees, $61K a year. And then the state shared revenue source multimodal transportation fees, $34,000 a year. Those are the major revenue sources there. Capital Improvement Fund. This funds your parks and open space capital projects, as well as your public building capital projects. REIT is the biggest funding source there at $2.2 million a year. Interfund transfers. What that is the utility funds transfer in money, roughly about half of that amount actually, to fund repairs to the maintenance building. Okay, planned in 19 and 20. The other half comes from the Youth and Family Services Fund for thrift shop planned repairs. We have our 15-year Mercer Island Parks levy, right? And that ends last year's 2023 for that levy. $252,000 a year is dedicated to various capital projects, open space vegetation management in particular. Grants, $190,000 in 2019. Private contributions of $171,000 in 2020. That's tied to the Island Crest Park Southfield project. We have King County, that's a 6-year parks levy. It's last year, it expires at the end of 2019. So we have $105,000 that we should be receiving next year. And then finally, impact fees, park impact fees at $31,000 a year. Those are your major revenue sources. Looking at technology and equipment fund. So this is primarily funded by interfund transfers. As you will recall, the general fund budgets $250,000 a year of general tax support. It gets transferred to this fund, and it's just for general technology and equipment needs. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. In addition, we have some money that comes from the general fund for the community center sinking fund. Now, up through this year, it's been $80,000 a year, half of which came from room rental fees from the community center, the other half coming from property tax. And looking with the community center staff, Ryan and his folks, we've been able to reduce that from $80,000 a year to $58,000 a year, which is good. And then finally, we have the police camera sinking fund at $12,000 a year. Utility funds are $124,000 in 19. And the street fund, $85,000 in 19, that's tied. If you're wondering, why is the street fund contributing to the technology and equipment fund? This is related to the mobile asset data collection project in 2019. And then I'd just like to recognize the Rotary Club for their $2,500 per year contribution, which goes to the community center and helps fund equipment and technology and furnishing replacements there. And that's an annual thing, and we appreciate that. Utility funds, water, sewer, stormwater rates, this is the portion of rates that is dedicated to capital projects. So as you see, the $2 million a year in water, $1.4 million in sewer, and $525,000 a year in stormwater. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Francie, who will update you on the REIT forecast. The last time we talked about REIT in terms of a 6-year forecast was back in March when we did the CIP kickoff with the council.
Sorry. I am good? Okay, thank you. So first of all, the real estate excise tax forecast is detailed on pages G4 and G5 in your budget document. There's more detail there than I'm going to cover tonight. Staff has reviewed REIT receipts through September of this year. And at this point, for this year, 2018, we're forecasting a REIT surplus of about $480,000. So the budget for REIT was done 2 years ago when we were adopting the budget for 27 and 2018. And the number of sales really are running consistent to what we forecasted then, but the average home sale price has boosted up quite a bit. So that is where that $480,000 in REIT revenue exceeds the budget for 2018. Now, I just want to say, that REIT has been fully programmed into the proposed 2019-2020 capital program. So it has been used in the budget before you, the budget proposal for capital before you tonight. When we did do the REIT forecast back in March at the kickoff, we were forecasting 450 sales a year. That is unchanged at this point. The average sales price, though, is starting to tick down a little. Our average sales price has dropped the last 2 months. And the current forecast just reflects a small reduction from 1.6 million to 1.56 million. I believe we'll be fine with that for the year. And I mentioned it, but just a reminder, the two things that drive the forecast are the number of sales per year and the average sales price. We forecast in two pieces for home sales or property sales that are less than 5 million and are 5 million and less, and then for sales that are over 5 million. So for this year, 2018, we're forecasting 3.77 million in REIT revenue, and then 3.91 for next year, 19, and 4.05 million for 2020. And then just touching on the utility rates that have been recommended by the utility board for 2019 and 2020. I'm going to look at it high level first. So overall, for your average for all rates, 2019, the utility board's recommending their rates for water, sewer, stormwater, EMS result in an overall rate increase of 5.3%. And for 2020, own an overall rate increase of 4.7%. So an average of 5%. Given the operating budget, the capital budget, I feel like that is, we were expecting higher. So I feel like we've done a great job with the rates.
And the primary driver is capital projects on this.
Yeah.
And by issuing bonds, we're able to smooth things out, or by proposing to issue bonds, we're able to smooth things out on the rates. Okay, I'm going to move us to the CIP project summary real quickly. Yeah.
I sent you some other information regarding REIT, and can you just, obviously with the sad passing of Paul Allen, I did see some articles in publication indicating that there was some sales of some properties that he once owned. I'm just curious if you can just sort of elaborate on that and what impact that particular sale has on, because I think that sale may have occurred after your projections, and I don't know if there's been any significant impact or will be any impact at all. So if you can just address that.
Sure. And Chip, why don't you go back to the that slide? Thank you. So through September, our REIT is running just ever so slightly behind my forecast. Our sales for homes and properties over $5 million. The revenue we'd be brought in through September was $227,300. There was one property sale at the very beginning of October, the one that Benson mentioned, which is for $14.6 million. For the city, that generates $72,000 in REIT, $72,443 in REIT. And that, with that property sale, it brings our REIT revenue for sales over $5 million to just shy of the $300,000. So there's really not any extraordinary REIT generated by that sale. And I think that's,
It just helps us meet our
it
projections.
just helps us meet our projections. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. CAP project summary. We'll look first at the 6-year plan, and this is by project category, just to orient you, just paint a broad picture. 134 projects over the 6-year period, just shy of $102 million. You'll notice that almost half of it relates to water and parks and open space projects, as determined by the amount of the capital projects over that 6-year period. When you look at it by funding status, let me define this. Funded no change means it's in the current 6-year CAP, which is 2017 through 2022, and it's showing up in this one as well. And there's the only change that would have happened would have been a modest inflationary adjustment. There'd been no timing change, no scope change on the project. Modified refers primarily to a timing or a scope change. New is it's new to this 6-year CAP. It wasn't on the current 6-year CAP. And then, of course, unfunded or partially funded speaks for itself.
So
Question?
could you clarify again?
Sure.
The funded modified, I didn't.
No worries.
follow
It
that.
means that it was in the current 17 to 22 CIP, and that in this particular 6-year CIP, we made a change in either the timing and or the scope of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, let's look at now the capital budget, the 19-20 period by category. It's 98 projects for 19 and 20, $31.6 million. You'll notice that water, streets, and pedestrian bicycle facilities and sewer are the top 3. That equals about 2/3 of the projects by dollar amount, just to provide some perspective there. When you look at it by funding status, you'll see that 96% of the projects are funded, okay? 4% are either partially funded or unfunded. And just a reminder, the reason why we show partially funded and unfunded projects is to put them on the council's radar. So when things happen that we weren't expecting, a sale of a major commercial property or whatever, there's an opportunity to come back to the council and to complete the funding for a partially funded project or for an unfunded project. And so it's just to keep it on your radar, something that's important, we're looking for grants for, any other, surprise funding source. Okay, and lastly, fund balances. This is important. France and I are pretty thrilled by this. This is unusual. You'll see some red numbers, the negative numbers. That's temporarily dipping into working capital reserves in these funds, and this is really just 2 funds, the Capital Improvement Fund and Technology and Equipment. We're okay with that. When you see the big $426,000 number in the 2022 column, that's okay. That fund can handle it. It's just temporary. Look at 2024. All numbers in the black, all positive numbers. That's what you want. It's okay to temporarily go negative. You're not really going negative because we have working capital reserves to temporarily absorb that. It all works itself out in the course of the 6 years. This is a good thing. This hasn't always been the case. as long-term council members will recall, we've usually had problems in the street fund and capital improvement fund in particular. Yes, sir.
If I could, I just would use this moment to ask you to sort of back to basics in a big way, but we're asking the voters to approve a levy lid lift.
Right.
Because we have predicted shortfalls, yet you've just told us that everything's going to be balanced. Help us understand the difference between these two situations.
So we're splitting our financial world into the operating budget, which is where we have our financial challenges, and the capital budget, which is what we're talking about tonight. The funding sources are primarily different, not exclusively, but primarily. So for example, we use real estate excise tax as a primary funding source in the street fund and capital improvement fund. Utility rates fund both operations and capital projects, okay? Our problems are regarding our operating budget and our non-utility operating budget, meaning the operating budget that's funded primarily by taxes and non-utility fees. Does that?
And why wouldn't we just take money from here and solve the other problem?
I legally cannot do that. I cannot take REIT and use it to fund the general fund, for example. I can't take utility rates and use it to address the general fund problems. Not an option for me. I literally am handcuffed.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Next up, CIP project review time. And I want to reference you to G13. We call it the horse blanket sheet. Section G of your budget document, page 13. So this is the one. You pull it out like this. We figured we just would go through this sheet. This summarizes all the projects. And while it shows all 6 years and the funding sources to the right of the sheet, we thought because of time, we were just going to focus on 19 and 20. That's what we typically do with the council. They're organized by project category and then by funding status, you'll see. We're going to, as I mentioned, we'll focus on the biennium, and just because there's so many projects, and just a reminder, we didn't have our CAP review with the council back in June. That's the first time that's happened as long as I've been here. We had to sacrifice that given all that was going on in that time frame. So we're doing that tonight, in effect, and to get through things efficiently. And as a reminder, since so many projects they're not new, right? They've been in the CAP before, they've just been tweaked in terms of inflation, or maybe the scope has changed or the timing has changed somewhat. We reviewed them with the council by exception, meaning we're only going to speak to them if you have a specific question on a specific project. Now, in addition, because there's always projects that are of council interest, and we're pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good at knowing what you're going to care about. And we've highlighted, and I put in the Agenda Bill 8, we decided to take the small parks and street ends project. It just wasn't worth highlighting, so we've removed it from the presentation. It was just too small to really get into. So we're going to talk about 7 notable projects we have dedicated slides to. With that, I want to invite Jessie and her folks up. Parks and Rec is first, again, starting from G13 if you want to follow along. And you'll note that for each project category, we have this overview slide that kind of paints a picture, and then we'll actually show tables of the listed projects. And when you see a project that's in red, let me just show you, go forward, like you'll see the next slide, open space veggie management's in red. That means we have a dedicated slide. Hang tight, we'll get to that and present specifics on that particular project. Jessie, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Again, Jessie Bond. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director. And joining me tonight, Ryan Daly, the Community Center Manager. I mentioned at our last budget meeting that Ryan would be stepping in as the Interim Director as I look towards maternity leave. Elaine Summergren and Paul West also here tonight. All right, so this first slide is just a good reminder. The Parks, Recreation and Open Space Plan that we're currently working from was adopted in 2014. We have included in your operating budget a proposal to update that plan in 2019. It's an important reminder because we will take that planning opportunity to evaluate, prioritize, strategize the out years of the Parks Capital Plan. So I've had some questions about why is this project in 2022? I agree, I have some questions as well about the out years, so we will take advantage of that strategic planning opportunity next year to reprioritize. Also, really, really important to remember, and I'll highlight this a little bit later, that the PROS plan is what we have to adopt every 6 years. I don't set that schedule. I think it's frankly too often, but we need to do that to maintain grant eligibility. And we have received substantial grant funding over the years through RCO. So here's our snapshot of the parks projects, 10 primary projects that are reinvestment, maintenance, major maintenance projects. The one next to open space and vegetation management is certainly misleading because that number represents many, many projects over the biennium. And then funding also for recreation trails projects. Next slide. Okay, so this is your list of currently funded projects, and I'm not planning to go through them. As Chip mentioned, we're doing this by exception. So the one we do need to spend some time talking about tonight is open space management, and then certainly if you have questions about the others, we'd be happy to discuss those as well. Chip, let's go to the next slide. So before I dive into the details of what's happened with open space management, I just want to remind you that these are the properties that fall under this category for maintenance. I know in my short time here with the city, many of our community members assume that open space is this kind of obscure location where we have trees and that's it. And that's not exactly the case. Many of our most active parks, Luther Burbank being one, has a significant area that we treat as open space and use resources accordingly. Next slide, please. All right, so this is just a historical snapshot of the funding for open space management since the 2009-10 biennium. We've gone up a little over $100,000. The O&M levy provides $142,000 a year. Just a friendly reminder that levy sunsets in 2023, so we have some future discussions in that regard. And then REAP provides the balance of funding for these for open space management. So, I believe our city manager sent to you some information probably more than a month ago about what has happened with prevailing wage rates. As you know, as a government entity, we are required by the state to follow public bidding laws and public contracting laws. And one of those requirements is the payment of prevailing wages. So when we contract for work, our contractors have to pay rates that are determined by the Department of Labor and Industries. We were admittedly blindsided, I think like every other government entity in the state of Washington, in August when we learned that the prevailing wage rates were increasing for landscapers by 111%. So effectively, the hourly rate we will now, our contractors will have to pay, which is passed on to us, it's going from $17.87 to $37.67 an hour. I can tell you in my time in this business, I have never seen a jump like this. This is pretty unprecedented. It did catch us off guard. We were anticipating an increase, but not this. So the greatest impact is to your open space management budget and the reason we're talking about it. So let me walk you through the chart and tell you about how we've done our estimating at this point. So in the first column is the 17-18 budget, and where you see restoration contracts, that's actually the portion of the 1.07 million budget that we contract out. So we go out to bid and we have contractors come in, actually quite a number of them, to do the maintenance work. So a little over half of that budget goes towards maintenance contracts. The other half is for everything else. It's for the staff that work in this area of capital projects, supplies, plants, material, things like that. Going to the next column, we simply inflated the restoration contract number by 111%. I will admit it's not perfect math. We know there's more complicating factors than just the payment of laborers, but it was the best number we had at this point. So the estimated need for 1920 to maintain level of service is about 1.16 million to continue doing the work we did in 17-18. We also inflated the other part of that budget by 4%. So again, staff costs, supply costs, things like that. So our estimated need is 1.7 million, just solely based on this prevailing wage increase. Go ahead.
You know, I think it was at the last meeting, I think, whether it was the city attorney or city manager, mentioned that obviously everybody was caught off guard with this, but I thought there was some discussion by either the city attorneys or city managers about trying to address this issue. I don't know if that's true, and I mean, are we now locked in for sure, or is there a chance that this number might decline?
We are hoping that the statistician, who we sent a letter along with several other jurisdictions sent letters, I know Bellevue sent a letter, Renton sent a letter, we're hoping that it will be reevaluated. From our perspective, it's not necessarily a done deal, and time will tell whether or not they reevaluate this increase as to landscape wages. It's specific to landscapers, and part of the City of Mercer Island's analysis was that they applied this to the Puget Sound region, not factoring in that there was a large exception in the collective bargaining agreement that they looked at for large-scale projects. Most of ours are on the small-scale side, and so that was the argument we made to ask them to revisit this methodology for computing this number. So we're hoping that it will be revisited, but we don't know.
Can you clarify whether or not this is something that the state legislature takes up, or is this something that there's a person in Olympia or wherever that will actually be able to make the determination? How and when would we see some degree of resolution to this, one way or the other?
That's a great question, Mayor Bertlin, and I'm not sure if it's going to go beyond the industrial statistician, who we asked to revisit this, and if it will be taken up by the legislature. Right now, it's clearly within the purview of the Department of Labor and Industries, specifically their industrial statistician.
And I didn't come prepared with my prevailing wage legislative history, but this was tied to a legislative change that happened last year, which, Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, it allowed prevailing wage rates to be tied back to bargaining agreements. The interesting thing about landscaper bargaining agreements is there's not just one, there's many, and so we believe, as others do, that there was an error in how this was tabulated. We have not had success yet, per Carrie's comment, but we and many, many others are actively engaged in this conversation.
And no general sense of when we might have some degree of resolution?
No, we continue to monitor it, and we occasionally follow up. We are hoping to know more soon. Jesse's right that this was prompted by the legislature tying this to a collective bargaining agreement. That agreement said for projects less than $275,000, those would be exempted out of this collective bargaining agreement. That we submit is, our contracts don't meet that threshold. So our argument was that we should also get carved out of this. So hopefully the industrial statistician will revisit this and will hopefully lower the prevailing wage for that category of work.
As you can imagine, literally every government entity that's contracting for landscape maintenance is impacted. This is millions and millions of dollars that school districts, housing authorities, everybody's come to the table and said this is not acceptable. So we're hopeful for change, but we cannot guarantee it at this point.
So we're budgeting with due caution.
We are. So if, and I'll get to the next slide.
So we've got
Go ahead.
Dave and then Celine.
I just want to have you touch, while you have everybody here, can you explain to the public what open space vegetation management is real quickly so they understand? We're talking about CIP.
Sure. Good point. I am going to defer to Elaine. She can provide a much better explanation than I can. Did you get it? No. Okay, you're on now. No? Let's see.
I think, yep, that one's working, great. Open space vegetation management. So open space vegetation management covers all of the areas of our parks that are not considered maintained portions of the park. These are the parts of the parks that are not mowed or have horticultural landscape beds, but are left in a natural state, more as a habitat value for ecosystem services, stormwater buffering. Generally on Mercer Island, most of those are forested areas. Not only do we maintain vegetation within them, but also a full trail system within them. And the work that we do in those forests is various parts of restoration. So this includes removing noxious weeds and invasive plants. It includes replanting, so extensive tree planting for declining canopy. And what else am I missing there? I think that's most of what we do in there.
And that's very active right now, right? We're in the beginning of tree planting season, so I've seen personally staff out there, not necessarily city staff, but contractors planting right now.
Yes, we generally plant thousands of plants every fall.
I'll
Dave?
just point out that Chip unveiled the map of open space properties. Thank you.
Dave, did you have a?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly shocking and horrifying to everybody in the room, right? And understand that we don't have a choice until there are some decisions made about the rate of pay, but we certainly have a choice about the amount of those services we consume. And I want to see if there's an appetite either in your group or within the council to begin to talk about how do we cut back on the consumption of those services. I realize if Dan's watching on TV, he's going to race down here and get me.
Or Elaine might.
I get it, but you know, until there's some resolution, it like just with the simple calculation, that's like $75,000 per year per landscaper, which is I might change careers. So if there's an appetite to constrain our spending on this until we can get some resolution to the hourly issue.
That is a perfect segue. May I keep going, and then we'll talk about what that.
I just wanted to set you up.
Absolutely. So this is a condensed version of the previous slide. Again, top line in 2017-18, 1.07 million was budgeted for this work. Your 1920 budget is currently at 1.485, almost 1.5 million. Our estimated need, again, it's based on the math that we're able to do right now, is 1.7 million to maintain level of service from last year. So we have proposed an increase that came from REIT, and Chip or Francie can talk more about that. That leaves us short about $200,000. So we are looking at a level of service reduction. And I think your question might be, well, Jesse, what are we going to reduce? Is it acres maintained? Is it less invasive plants? Yes and yes. It's probably a little bit of everything. Chip, if you can go to the next slide. This is a situation that came on late in the budget process, but I'll just remind you, we have an adopted open space vegetation management plan. It was adopted by the council. It has identified priorities of work. We will use that to guide our level of service reductions. We are still working on that. Part of what we don't know, and even the contractors we work with, is we will put our bids out as we normally do. We don't exactly know what we're going to get back. Is it going to be a straight 111% increase? Is it going to be something less, something more? So we need to test the bidding environment. Our contractors are just as caught off guard by this as we are. So that's using the guide, the plan to guide our level of service reductions. That's where we plan to head. I've already mentioned we'll continue working on this with L&I and all of our other government friends. We also will be talking about alternative delivery methods. And to be candid, I know some of our peer cities are just bringing all this work in-house. We didn't feel that that was something we could pull the trigger on right now today. There are other implications, certainly our ability to attract and retain staff, limited space, you need more trucks, you need more equipment. But it's worth it if we are not successful in, if L&I does not reduce the rate, we are not successful, we will need to begin looking at other delivery methods for this service, which we would be spending time in 1920 on. The other thing, back to the question, is in 2019, it will probably be in the second quarter, we would plan to come to you with the standard open space vegetation management report, tell you where we're at, perhaps continue the conversation about level of service reductions, and we should have more information by that time. If the council desires to make a change now, we would certainly talk about that too. So that is open space management. It's really the most significant change in our budget. I have a few more slides, but if there's any questions at this point, we can pause.
Dave?
Just trying to take the temperature of the council, so appreciate that we're not going to have to swallow the 111% increase, but we're still saying we're going to reduce levels of service and take down a 50% increase, right? Which seems steep because it's already starting as a big number. I guess I'm polling my friends up here to see if there's an appetite to bring that down to current spending level and not go up to that 50%, or how would you have that discussion?
Well, I think where we've been generally at sort of a macro level with regard to the budget conversations, both operating and capital, is for us to be providing questions, raising issues, and then the conversation and tough decisions will actually be made on the 20th. So I think what we would capture is the extent to which staff would recommend, seek further potential reductions in the level of service, be it, as you say, number of acres, number of trees, however one does it, but equally whether or not there's going to be some degree of appetite coming from other council members to explore it. We wouldn't get into the details tonight. Celine?
So from my perspective, I've followed this issue pretty closely. It's a timing issue. There's a lot of discussions, a lot of moving parts. If we were to get as far as approving this in the biennium, and we got, right now, I assume the services are being done under the old contract. So the people we're seeing out there, we're not subject to the 111% increase.
Through the end of this year.
You're outbidding, you're looking at the next biennium, you're looking at what you might contract in 1920. Would this come before the council, even if we approve this in the biennium, to say, hey, council, do you want to actually do this? If it came back and it was, 111% higher, would this come before us again as a body, or is this approval of the CIP and these funding amounts for the open space vegetation management? What is the process there?
Yeah, I think
Chip
the
jumps in.
staff will return in 2019 with an update. What would that update include, and what decision-making would you anticipate to the best of your current knowledge?
Well, let me just say this. Generally, contracts are awarded by the city manager once the budget's approved. So that's not something we would generally bring back. I would anticipate, though, by, let's say, June of 2019, maybe sooner, we will know where we are with L&I. This was our best strategy was to try to close the gap short-term because we're going out to bid in an environment where the new L&I wage is set. It is not something we can adapt.
I would chime in and say, I think we'll be more creative with our contracts. We might do some short-term contracts, some more limited in scope contracts until we have a better idea of where this is going.
We are talking to our contractors about bidding strategies. We've typically, bid smaller pieces of work. We're talking about, is there an advantage to bidding more projects together? We're looking at everything right now. Today, I don't have a solid recommendation on how to close this gap. We're working on it. There's also, I will say, a mid-biennial budget conversation that would be timely for us to reevaluate this fund at that time. Is that appropriate, Chip?
Absolutely.
That'd be about a year from now? The mid-biennial?
So what you're faced with is, in essence, while you're adopting a biennial budget ultimately, the direction could be, here's the amount for 19. Let's revisit the 2020 budget in November of next year. That's one option.
Yeah.
If this is something where you're just uncomfortable with the budget that's proposed for 19 and 20 and you want to skinny it down further, you would save that decision for November 20th. And the challenge that staff would have is we can't paint a picture for what that would look like, right? It would be an arbitrary, here's your dollar amount for 19 and 20. from the council. That's the challenge, just because of the timing of this. We just can't paint that picture for you.
Bruce?
Help me understand the timing of when contracts will be negotiated versus this hopeful revisiting of the prevailing wage law. The place I'm going is, I wouldn't want to see us in a scenario where we go and negotiate and are sort of locking in contracts at $37 an hour, and then 6 months later, we're told, oh, just kidding, it's 17, but we're locked in at the higher rate, and or have done a bunch of work at the higher rate and are sort of shooting, regretting that we've gone down that path. Now, so the place I'm going is, how do we maintain the flexibility here or avoid spending more for work than there's a possibility we'll have to spend?
That's a great question. And in the history of my career, prevailing wage rates have never gone down. So to your point, if we execute a contract in March of 2019 and the next month the rate drops, that's something I've actually never dealt with. I presume we would write into our contracts some ability, and of course we'd be working with L&I. We're not in total control of this, to make sure we could accommodate that adjustment. That being said, to Francie's point, we're not looking to execute contracts for the full biennium at this point. We will have to take smaller bites into 19 to keep the work moving, while we're being mindful of what's happening with Department of Labor and Industries.
So what I'm hearing then is the general sense that we're going to have to be as flexible yet as prudent as possible in 19, and then really the decision for 20 will come as a consequence of whatever the L&I decisions are.
I think that's well summarized. And keep in mind, we haven't ruled out, a number of options, including trying to bring some of this work in-house. The timing of this, though, just didn't allow us to really fully build out that scenario and present you with really well thought out options. I need some more time, but that may be an option. I'm also, frankly, a little concerned about making any commitments to in-house labor, because that's a very hard market right now too, especially when our contractors will be paying $37.67 an hour.
So I think what I'm hearing then is for the 20th is to come back, with some proposed directions for 19, understanding then that 20 would probably be brought up with greater information, but also a year from now, in the sense of the mid-biennium budgeting process. So just a little more specificity in terms of what some of the choices are that we can make. Is that a fair statement?
No, I think that's totally fair. And I get the balance between triaging, letting the open spaces get away from us. If we were to stop work for 2 years and let this thing settle, if it ever did settle, that could be horrific too. So just giving us some options on how we might look at reducing, the work for a period of time, doing certain triage work, and just maintaining it at the status quo.
Absolutely. We can do that. All right. I have just a couple wrap-up slides here.
Carrie's got a question
Okay.
or comment.
Excuse me, just a quick update. It looks like on November 9th, the Prevailing Wage Advisory Committee will be meeting, and we're hoping that they will take up this issue in discussion at that meeting. Again, several other jurisdictions besides Mercer Island have written letters, and so we're hoping to have some more information to follow up on this as soon as November 9th.
Great, thank you. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
All right, I think the final two slides here, Chip. Okay, as Chip mentioned, as we work through the presentation tonight, we will be highlighting the unfunded or partially funded projects. And the one that we wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about is the Luther Burbank dock repair, which, let's go to the next slide. Particularly, we wanted to call this one out as, dock repairs, replacement are very challenging projects. Luther Burbank dock is at the end of its useful life, or very darn close. There's an important piece here to call out. This is where your pros plan becomes very, very important. We are applying for a grant. Actually, it's due in 2 days to support the design work we would like to do in 19. We're estimating, if we're successful, about a $90,000 grant from RCO. Tick forward to 2021, when we will be in the queue to actually be doing the repair work. we would be going after another boating facilities grant, which is conservatively estimated right now at $175,000. We hope to actually have additional resources, grant resources we can apply for. We will not be able to apply for that grant if the PROS plan is not adopted by end of February 2020. So I just wanted to show how that plan sort of weaves into our future plans for a project that is certainly a high maintenance and safety priority.
Great. I actually did have a question, if you're done with this, about the South Mercer playfield, ball field backstop safety upgrades. I mean, I know where they are, and I know generally what they are based on what's in here. Is this an area where it's sort of it's both a Parks and Rec facility, but also a school district facility?
Correct. It's actual school district property. It's our, we do the maintenance.
So this is both, but this is a capital project, so it is just
our
beyond the
capital
maintenance.
projects. Mhm.
Has there been any conversation about what this project means, and particularly what this project means in the context of the women's softball team? Would that, if we were to look at this project and there were to be issues with the funding, would that have an impact on the high school women's team?
An impact in,
Well, insofar as these are improvements that
Yeah.
are be done if the improvements weren't done.
so you might recall, and Paul will correct me if I have this data point wrong, this project was not previously funded. We moved it into the funding category, first of all, because of safety and risk management needs. It is a best practice with athletic fields, softball, baseball fields, to have netting and improved backstops for foul ball safety. I also had a concern about the equity of our investments. We've put quite a significant amount of funding into Island Crest Park, not nearly the same infrastructure improvements into South Mercer. So we needed to reevaluate and make sure that we're treating all of our resources in an equitable way. That's why that change happened.
Great, thanks.
Can I ask
Benson?
With respect to this particular project, I'm just curious, I meant to go out there and look, but is there signage now warning the public about the dangers or the hazards of foul balls, or telling people to be aware of?
Duck. No.
Duck?
Yes, there is.
Any other questions for Jesse and her staff?
Council?
I do.
Benson? Yeah?
Bruce?
I just,
Okay. Bruce, then Benson.
I'm going where we shouldn't go in terms of designing things, but I'll go there anyway. This is about,
He's had a month off. He's ready to
putting
do
fencing
this.
over the public areas between the fields, but as long as you're putting posts up, why not put the fence over where the foul balls are coming from and keep them from going there in the first place towards any of those areas? Just a curiosity as much as anything. Seems like that's a place to constrain them rather than trying to keep them from landing on people's heads after they've gone up.
It has been done. I don't believe it's recommended. You end up with balls and birds and all sorts of things. You're talking about an overhead net, right, versus the straight up nets?
You see it all the time with sort of cages around the batter's box, right?
Right.
With the ball goes up, it's going to come back down rather than continue up.
I will, at the risk of designing this tonight, I will just tell you there are some operational and risk management challenges with that. Teenagers, for example, see that as a fantastic opportunity to climb on the nets. And we then have to engineer for all sorts of crazy scenarios that we don't have the ability to supervise. But I like where you're headed. I wish we could do that.
I will stop now.
Benson?
I am not designing a thing, but I have a question on G25. And this is, I realize this is not in the current.
Can you tell everybody what the project is?
I'm sorry. This is on page G25. It's the Luther Burbank Park new facilities. And this is not in the biennium, but I was curious because in the description, there's regarding public safety issues because the parking lot is not lit. And then there was other discussions about other improvements that seem to be quite separate and distinct from this parking lot issue. So I was wondering whether or not it's possible to, and this is a question for the staff, I mean, it's whether or not it's possible to carve out this particular project into two, one that pertains to the parking lot lighting issue and the other regarding the other improvements. Again, I'm just concerned about the safety issue, and so I don't know if that's something that you folks have thought about.
You want to take this one, Bob?
They certainly are two distinct projects. There's not, there's nothing that links the two projects inherently. So that is up to council to decide whether to lump them or split them.
Is it possible before we make a decision that you can come back and at least break it out so we know what the cost is of the parking lot lighting versus the other improvements?
Sure. I also want to just zoom out for a moment and remind you that these are projects in the out years. And I, again, as your new Parks and Recreation Director with new eyes on this, I would recommend limited touches on the out years. I think we're looking ahead to a PROS plan, provided it's funded, that will reprioritize all of these projects. We can get you those numbers with ease.
Yeah, and I realize they are in the out years,
Okay,
and I said that in the
great.
beginning. I'm only concerned because of the
Just-
safety issues that
Yep.
were raised in your description. And so,
And to your point, and with all due respect, safety is, we have reprioritized the 1920 projects based on safety, so that's a very good point. We'd be happy to get that number for you.
Council, anything more? All right. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Back to Chip.
Okay, good news. We don't have to talk about street projects because you reviewed that back on May 1st and then approved the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, back on June 5th of this year. That is a subset of the CIP. It's already been put to bed, so we don't have to talk about that stuff. Which moves us, yes, sir, on streets.
Benson has to go there.
no, not about, I'm just curious about, this is on G46. This is your town center streets north. And the only question I have is, in your description of the revenues for this particular project, it identifies the street fund. And I was just wondering whether or not impact fees have any bearing, or at least do they provide any type of revenue source? And that's the only question.
On this one, looks like no, Francie.
Okay, well, there it is.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Yep.
We're going to move on to the next project category, which is general government. Again, this includes technology, equipment, vehicles, and buildings. Here's an overview slide. We're talking about 26 projects in the biennium, just under 4.9 million. A large chunk of them are related to our public buildings and reinvesting in those, $1.6 million in round numbers. Vehicle replacements, as you recall, we have our own little fleet fund. We accumulate money into a sinking fund, and so the planned vehicle replacements equals 1.2 million in 19 and 20, but that's already been pre-funded. So let's invite Mike Kaiser up, Mike Mandela from Fire, and Marcy, Marcy Olson, our facilities guru. They'll be here to answer questions. I'll be your tour guide through general government. I have the first slide of funded no changes put up there. Any questions on these particular projects before I move to the next one?
Hey, Chip, on the previous slide, can you remind me what sustainability for 25,000 is?
Sure. Francie, you want to take that one?
So several biennia ago, we added a project just for sustainability opportunity projects. A lot of those have been, in the past, LED lighting in the town center, at the community center. This is kind of a sinking fund, not truly, but the idea originally was that we would do projects that had payback, that would refund the project. Now, we don't really manage it that way at this point. It's really 25,000 a biennium that's available should a project be identified. So we haven't specified anything at this point. We have done several in the past. I believe there is not one identified for the current biennium. So it's really just available if the council, because that has been a council priority, sustainability. It's available if a project comes, if some specific work is identified around sustainability that the council wants to pursue.
And Marcy looks for opportunities in public buildings where she could use this if appropriate, right? Beyond just street lighting that we've used it in the town center before, or lighting in the community center parking lot.
Is there a slide with a total of all of the IT projects? Like, I see them kind of smattered around, but it's hard to identify all the IT stuff.
No, but I can get it for you. Give me a few minutes.
Okay, I'm going to move us back to this slide. Any questions on these projects? You'll see where our website redesign is coming in 19.
So I do. So, Mike, of that computer equipment replacements, I'm guessing that, sorry, I'm not talking on my mic. I'm guessing that covers staff laptops as well as servers, and it's the whole shoot and match. So of that, $400,000, what percentage of your total IT estate does that represent replacing?
That's a good question. It depends. So we have, I would say, roughly maybe 12 or 13 categories of equipment that range from servers, firewalls, network switches, computers and laptops, police and fire MDCs. The life cycle for each of those is different. So, for example, we try to make a server last 7 years, whereas we might try to make a computer last 5. So it's hard to give you an exact percentage. But I would say generally the average life cycle is roughly 5 years if I averaged all of them together.
Okay, so my question's a little bit different. If if you're replacing $500,000 in 2 years, does that represent 10% of your total infrastructure investment that falls into that line item, or does that represent
I was gonna say roughly 20%.
20%?
Can I jump in? For the total for technology projects, probably the best place to look is page G160. That summarizes the projects that are being purchased out of the Technology and Equipment Fund. So there is some equipment in there too, but that is your summary list of technology projects.
Okay. Can I move us to the next? You bet. I'll press pause.
While they're researching that, can you tell me, as you look at the IT projects, are there any projects that are fully scoped and then others that are not? Some that have potential to creep and others that don't? I assume your equipment numbers are pretty locked in. You know what equipment you're buying. You said it's 20% of your fleet, and you're going to do that. Is there anything else in here that has potential to grow?
It's a really good question. So our projects generally on the software side are not fully scoped. We have a high level understanding of what we want to do with the department and or the organization. We do a little bit of general costing with a couple of vendors based on a broad discussion with them. We can't get specific numbers until we give them specific requirements. Once the council adopts the budget and moves the project forward, we then get into specific scoping and developing specific requirements. Sometimes we do a full procurement process and, you know, we get specific numbers at that point. Historically, I would say it's very rare that we go over these numbers. We did have a project, for example, in this last biennium that we did, but we did that very purposefully. It wasn't an unforeseen. We made a calculated choice to try something new with it. But generally speaking, at least in my experience here since 2004, we typically stay under the numbers that you see here with rare exception. It does happen, but it's not the norm.
Dave? You? Okay. We can always come back.
Sure.
I'm going to move us on to the next slide. Is that okay?
David,
Or you want to
comfortable if
stay
we move
focused on
forward?
technology?
Okay. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's completely closed if you want to circle back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So you have a mixture of building repairs, the planned fleet replacements are there, page 68. Any questions on these particular projects? I just will mention on our various public buildings, includes our fire stations, community center, Luther Burbank admin, city hall, and of course the maintenance building, which sometimes is referred to as the maintenance shack. I should mention that during the Great Recession, I noted this in the agenda bill, and following the Great Recession, we've had no choice but to defer quite a bit of maintenance. And we tried to really get this built into the 6-year CIP. It needs to be done. You can't defer maintenance forever. There's a number of projects that are planned in the coming 6-year period related to various buildings. But seeing no questions, I'm going to move us on to the next slide. Any questions on these projects?
I did have a question.
Sure.
Regarding the permitting system upgrades. Because this is part, I'm assuming this is part of DSG, as part of the permitting process. Is there a way to capture some of this in the fee rate study that we do, or the study that we're going to do, such that we can capture some of the costs of this system as we look at the total cost of running the department and issuing permit fees?
I'm looking at Mike, the technology
So-
surcharge fee.
Yeah, that's what I was just
Yeah.
whispering to Francie about. So we currently have a technology fee that gets assessed along with the permit fees. And we have discussed how to capture all the permitting activity, technology costs within that. That fee's relatively new. It's only been around for, I think, 2 budget cycles at this point. So we're still, figuring out how to do exactly what you're describing. So I think we can take that back.
It's currently 3%, as I recall.
I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
I'm pretty sure it's 3%. In any case, it's something that we need to look at and revisit.
Okay, because, I mean, the extent to which we are allowed by law to capture the expense of the IT system supporting the permitting process, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Here's some funded new projects, fairly modest amounts. Any questions on these?
Can you just comment on the city facility security cameras?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yes, so we have security cameras at city facilities. Places like the thrift store have cameras to help, loss of items there. We have security cameras at places like your water reservoir or city hall or, other city facilities. There's a couple of areas that need the cameras replaced, and this just funds that effort.
There's camera replacement?
It's camera replacement,
Okay.
effectively.
Yeah.
So I noticed that your network communications line item didn't make it to the slide. $300,000.
We're going to call that out specifically and have a,
Oh, it's got its own.
It's coming up.
it's got its own
Featured
Yep,
special
it's
slide.
coming.
slide.
We're not going to hide that from you, don't worry. So here we are. These 2 projects will get highlighted. We'll invite Jason up to talk about fuel cleanup, soil remediation, and then Mike has some special slides for you on the network communications infrastructure. Jason?
There we go. So soil remediation. So you recall that earlier this year, we came before you with an appropriation request for basically 2 injections here at the site. We've been in discussions with the property owner, and we actually met last week, and the first injection is happening actually this week. So we've agreed to the scope of work, which is great. The first injection will happen this week. The second injection is not going to happen for another 6 months. At that point, we'll have updated data to come back to you. And with that data, hopefully is a revised scope of work for a smaller dollar amount, hopefully in the future. But as you recall, this is required by the MUTCA under the RCW, and we have a legal requirement to remediate this site. And so sometime in Q2, I expect to be back to you with updated data and a new appropriation request for what's left at that site. You'll recall that 50% of this project is being funded by WCIA, and we expect that to continue. So as proposed in the budget, it's high-level dollars, what we expected during the last time I was here ongoing. Hopefully those dollars will be less, but we won't know until additional data is gathered. So stay tuned. More to come.
I should just mention, in terms of funding, we're looking for 50% of the funding cost. And if the levy lid lift passes tomorrow, that frees up a portion, not all, of the $2 million that I'm using to balance the 1920 budget for the general fund and YFS fund that you can then apply to this project. But as Jason noted, we won't know how much we really need until Q2 of next year. So we can afford just to wait till then.
So, Chip, I'm looking at G69, and in terms of 2019 and 2020, it has other funds at $240,000, nothing from the general fund. And so I'm just curious, what's the source of that money, the 240?
Yeah, it's 50% WCIA.
Right.
And the other 50% is unfunded. It's contingent on if the levy lid lift passes, I can find enough one-time money from fund balances to make up the difference.
Okay.
Okay? If it doesn't, we'll have we'll have a conversation on the 20th about how to prioritize this relative to other CIP projects.
Salim?
So maybe I'm not following, but the funded line is WCIA's contribution, the unfunded is what we would need to match to get the other 50%?
Yes.
So here, as we are in the CIP, we're short that amount because it's unfunded? Or that's in the CIP and funded in 1920?
It's unfunded at this point.
So you're looking for 240 if we can find it tonight?
We need to come up with 120. WCIA then matches the 120.
Per year, 1920.
And again, those are our best estimates at this point. We're hopeful that we won't need that much.
So just to be clear, would you like the council to find that amount of projects that we cull tonight out of 1920 so that that is funded?
What I would recommend is putting this as a follow-up item for November 20th, depending on the outcome of the election, and then we can revisit this on whether we need to do something with another CIP project to make up funding for this or what have you.
It seems to me there's two decision points. There's the levy, and then there's the data that you come back with.
And let me
So that we know
clarify.
what the effectiveness is.
The current work that I came back to you earlier this year with for the appropriation request is funded. So it's going to be that body of work is going to happen. So the 2 injections, it's the additional work beyond that is what you're seeing in the proposed budget here. That is the 50% that's unfunded. So the current scope of work is funded. It's the next phase of it that's unfunded, partially unfunded.
And the next phase is 19 and 20.
Correct.
Okay.
Council, you good with that? Okay.
I'm going to move us on to the next. We have a few slides, 4, I believe, dedicated to the network communications infrastructure on page G84. Mike?
Thank you. So I'm going to try to state a high level and just give you some background with this first slide. So the network or network communications is considered critical infrastructure, not only by me and your city staff and probably others, but the Department of Homeland Security outlines 16 critical sectors out there. One of them is communications, one of them is information technology. When I say critical in this context, though, I mean the city's network supports pretty much every service that we do here at the city, from things like email, the telephone system, being able to access, your enterprise asset management system and public works, SCADA. I could go on in every department and talk about how they use the network to deliver services, to access information, to provide information, and to communicate. And I put this next bullet in terms of, just a run-on sentence to kind of illuminate that. Buildings, devices, vehicles, sensors, employees, other government agencies, agencies like NORCOM, the state government, the federal government, the internet, telephony, 911. I could continue on and on about how we use the city's network to do business. Generally, at a high level, my goal has been sort of these 3 elements at the bottom of this slide with regards to designing your network for you. I need it to be responsive, which just means it's fast and has adequate bandwidth for us to do the things that we need to do. It needs to be resilient. So we try to automate disaster recovery capabilities into it so that IT's personnel are not required to be on site for it to recover itself. That's kind of a goal. And we have a business continuity, element that we build into our strategy. So we obviously could lose parts of our business just like any other business, and we plan for recovering from that. And then obviously cost effectiveness. We have to be able to do what we do within the resources we're given. So 2018 has been pretty interesting. We kind of have been talking it internally in a sort of humorous way. The fiber stars have aligned for some reason over Mercer Island. I really honestly don't understand it or why, but there are a number of initiatives that are completely unrelated to the city, things like King County Sewer Main Project or Sound Transit's light rail station, as well as projects that the city is working on, like the SCADA Master Plan implementation, its water meter program, that all have sort of network communication elements built into them. These unrelated projects have presented you with an opportunity that align really well with our network interests, how we communicate, how we get these services delivered. So go ahead and move on to the next one. So for example, King County, as you know, is replacing their sewer mains. In particular, the area that I'm focused on is from 77th Avenue to 77th Ave, crossing over I-90 in the community center area, along the I-90 trail to the North Mercer Way I-90 crossing near City Hall. So they are going to be opening up a trench along that pathway, and they have been willing to work with us to allow us to place conduit in that open trench. And you might imagine trenching along that length of trail would be very cost prohibitive for us to do on our own. But they're willing to work with us and let us put conduit in that trench. There's another small project in here that I wanted to talk about tonight, which is just the replacement of the fiber cable between City Hall and the Maintenance and Engineering Building. There's a number of projects, about 8, that relate to fiber in the city's network. Only 2 of them are in focus tonight. I only have numbers and specifics for you on 2 of them tonight, and I'm looking for direction on those. These other elements are going to come into focus in 2019 as some of these projects develop. So this project that you see before you, this network communications infrastructure, is simply me trying to tell the council and city management, hey, there are these things coming, and you really ought to take a look at taking advantage of them. And as they come into focus, I would like the opportunity to come back to you and say, okay, this one is now in focus. So for example, construction of the pathway along the King County Sewer Main Project. That is not in focus right now. All I have are design costs in focus. So as those elements come into focus, I'd come back to you and say, this is now in focus, here's what it is, here are the details, here's how much it is, here's the funding. Is it okay to proceed? I'm not asking for the ability to proceed just with this entire project out of the gate. So again, just to summarize, the 2 elements that I'm really looking for are those 2 that you see here, the King County Sewer Main design element, not construction, not putting in the fiber cable itself and turning it on, but just working with King County along their time frame to get their design work done. And then replacing the cable between this building and your maintenance and engineering facility, which needs to be done in general, but also will support future projects like the SCADA Master Plan implementation and your water meter replacement program. So with that, I can take questions.
So can I just be super crisp? The first one, the King County Sewer Main Project, that's design, and the second one is actually physically putting or replacing. Okay.
Between City Hall and Maintenance,
The cable.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So one is design and one is the physical. Okay.
So,
And they're 2 separate projects unrelated to each other. Yeah.
so Mike, how do those numbers on the PowerPoint, how do they match up with the numbers that are on G84, which talks
Really good question. So generally, the process for CIP, as Chip alluded to earlier, we would have had a preview with the council in June-ish timeframe, and we would have come to you and said, look, there's this set of elements, 8 or so elements around network design. We want to talk to you about it like we're doing right now. We want to let you know that this set of elements is dynamic. Some of these pieces are moving, some negotiations are happening with these agencies. And when those come into focus, we will continue to come back to the council. And I realize this is the first time you're seeing this. So that's why the numbers don't match up in The March, April timeframe, when we began development of the CIP, they were even less in focus than they are today. So again, I was simply trying to get a number put together to the best of my ability at that time to reflect, hey, there are these things coming down, and I want to prepare the city to take advantage of those opportunities should you decide to do so.
So Chip, can I ask a question then, Bruce? And that is, so in other words, the descriptions and the numbers that we're seeing in our binder are reflective of approximately 6 months ago?
Not
Because
that
that's
long
what I
ago.
took from your statement, is that when you...
Particularly in this project.
For this project.
Okay, and that's okay. I just want to make sure then that we understand that occasionally the numbers in the book might not match the numbers as are presented to us because you've had that opportunity to go and refine and/or further explore projects.
Yeah, at the time that the budget was developed for this project, it was a placeholder. It still is a placeholder, except that we're asking for support on the specific first step, the two sub-projects, I'll call it, that Mike just highlighted. So we still are asking for a placeholder for this work. Some of it to be designed or to be defined better, and the two projects that have been identified tonight.
So is the ask for the 120,000, which is 99 plus 21, or is the ask for the 300 plus 65?
So good question. What I would suggest is the council give me a thumbs up to move forward on the two projects outlined specifically here. And then know that I will come back to you as those other elements come into focus and I have specifics and I'm ready for you to decide, knowing that they will be in the range of the number that you see in this project. But that number is for sure going to change as those projects come into focus.
So 120 is a subset of the 365.
Correct. I think you can expect, should you decide to move forward on these, that you would see these additional requests come at a later date.
Celine?
So,
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Bruce
Oh,
was
go ahead.
actually leaning forward, my apologies.
So I certainly appreciate the sense of an opportunity presented to us, but I'm wondering, help me understand, a couple of years, whenever it was, we had Comcast out drilling holes all over the island to run a fiber network on the island, and then sometime more recently, we had CenturyLink saying we're going to run fiber in different places. And so there's an existing network of some sort out there. And then related to that, you have these channels of opportunity at much lower cost than you would otherwise, but it doesn't extend all the way to all the points that you might necessarily want to get to, your pump stations and SCADA points and things like that. So at the end of the day, I'm trying to understand how you're imagining that you're best served by putting in these trunks versus using vendors who have existing infrastructure out there. So help us understand
Sure.
how that ties together.
I'll say two things. The first is the city's network, even for a small agency, you're a full service city. It's fairly complex and really difficult for me, and we could get into a lot of detail this evening that would take a lot of time and probably wouldn't want to do in a public setting anyway. So I'm going to be really careful to try to stay at a high level. The city's network comprises cellular connections, fiber connections, copper connections, satellite connections, wireless, wired. There's a combination. We own some of it, we lease some of it. We lease some of it from other government entities who then lease it from private sector entities. You're right, Comcast came in recently and CenturyLink came in recently to do some infrastructure overhaul of their infrastructure on Mercer Island related to the services that they provide. Historically, Comcast has worked with government agencies to provide fiber for government purposes. They are very much out of that business and trying to get out of it wherever they are. They very much like charging cities and counties just like they charge a business. So they aren't really trying to work with us the same way they may have 20 or 30 years ago. But generally speaking, we do have the need to connect vehicles and buildings and pump stations and people. And we use a variety of connectivity to do that. And I did have an opportunity to speak with Deputy Mayor Neese earlier about some details about that. And I'd offer any, time up to any council member who wants to come in and get a more detailed look about how we network here at the city. But it takes a while to explain it. It's not something I can boil down for you in a 2-minute discussion, and I wouldn't do it any service. So I'd be more than happy at any time to, in a study session or just one-on-one, give you guys all the information you're looking for on that front.
Okay, but the main takeaway, I guess, should be for me that although we're seeing these discrete opportunities, you have a clear sense of how they fit into a whole, and they don't end up being small pieces that then
Absolutely.
sort of, unfortunately, sort of wonderful in and of themselves, but disconnected from anything else.
Absolutely.
because they-
No, this isn't, this is part of a grand design, if you will. There is and I tried to illuminate that with those 3 sort of purposes, that resiliency, the ability to recover from a disaster, speed, daily service delivery, customer service, our efficiency for staff. There's a lot of elements that we think about when we design the network, but yeah, it's not hodgepodge. There's a purpose with it.
Hey, Council, if I can just add, this is one of these, this doesn't happen very often. Ideally, we would have teed this up for you back in June at the CIP preview, which you mentioned we had to pass on. But, and then we would have had a study session between then and now, and there just hasn't been that opportunity. There's just been too much going on with the levy, with the Tully's property, and other things. And so what Mike and I envisioning, and we haven't had a chance to visit with Julie on this, is having a study session, either in January or dedicating some time, if the council's interested, your January planning session, to get into this topic a little bit and brief you, because the timing, this is just one of these things. If I'm sitting in your chair, I'm a little frustrated because I don't have I'd have more questions than answers at this point, and it's just the way it's worked out on this particular project, and it's unfortunate. It wasn't intentional. We apologize.
Celine?
So this is more to council. I think we could probably start talking about this a bit. We did have a study session on this, and this was in the study session of the King County Sewer Briefing, and there was quite a bit of information in the packet about this project. And so my recollection was it was a $300,000 to $500,000 range, and that was the cost of design and conduit and implementing it within the trench that was going to be the King County Sewer Project. There were still unfunded, unknown in those, you call it out of focus or not in focus, the other ends of that project. So how does City Hall get connected to this conduit? How does the community center get connected to this conduit? And then, of course, provisioning on both sides of the circuit and standing it up. So this, in my mind, was put in the context of the council package saying to replace a leased circuit. And this is the circuit that we lease from King County, who leases it from a private party. I'm forced to look at this and say, what's the ROI versus the risk of losing that connection? Because we might be gaining something, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what we might gain, but ultimately what we're deciding here tonight by beginning this funding process is the rest of the chipping away at the project. So it's $98,000 of design, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars of conduit. You're in the conduit with King County, somebody's got to inspect the work, somebody's got to make sure it's done right. I don't know that you have the bandwidth to do that. I don't even know if you're the right person to do that. Maybe that's DSG. This is a big, big project in my mind. And so here I would urge the council to say, if there's a funding need where we could look at, for example, the Honeywell site, and we need to find $240 for that, or there's some opportunities for other funding, I would not support this project. This, to me, is a big bite of the apple that we don't need to take on right now. I know it's an opportunity, and there's going to be a trench in the ground, and no trench should go unfibered, but to me, it is an opportunity that I'd take a pass on.
If I may respond, I don't want to interrupt your deliberation, but I just want to characterize it slightly differently. And we had a great discussion, and even with an hour that I had with the deputy mayor, it is difficult to really show you how the network works and how this element is pretty critical to how the city does business. The City Hall facility hosts our primary data facility. I hesitate to use the word data center because that sounds really, really snazzy, and I don't think it's that snazzy. And the community center holds our secondary. So this pipeline is actually critical to how we provide redundancy. We have built all of your business continuity functionality with regards to technology and communications at the community center. So our ability to keep these two buildings connected in a very stable, fast, reliable way is critical to me in my job in making sure the city can operate, in a variety of scenarios, including just day to day. And you are correct, we do have an existing lease on fiber there. We pay a monthly recurring fee. King County has that fiber from Comcast, and as I mentioned earlier, Comcast is very interested in getting out of that game. I don't know when that will happen. It could be 2 years from now, it could be 5 years from now, it could be 20 years from now. And in terms of ROI, I really do think about the long term here. Your community center and your city hall are long-term facilities that provide services. And so connectivity between them, to me, the ROI calculation, it's okay if you spread that out in long terms. That's just wanted to respond.
Yeah, and I appreciate the hour we took today, and the biggest part of that hour that I took away was, let's talk at the policy level. And I'm not sure this council has had a chance to really understand that network and what policy is guiding you, and where we should make multi-million-dollar investments or not make multi-million-dollar investments. And from a policy perspective, given technology and how it's changed with cloud computing and Azure and AWS and all the things that we could be doing differently, I think it's probably a good idea for the council to come back to that and have that discussion. And this, I think, would be the kind of place to talk about the long-term technology roadmap, the infrastructure network roadmap, and how we look at these as opportunities or as passes. And for me, unfortunately, it's just a pass.
Well, the good news is we don't have to make a decision tonight. We can ask a bunch of questions and then come back. Wendy?
And I would ask, if we're going to have a study session on this and look at the nuts and bolts of what Salim is talking about, that you also bring in the risk that we take in choosing one path or another, because I know the infrastructure is critical, and I know cybersecurity is a huge threat for all public entities and utilities, and that ratio, it's more than just ROI, it's risk exposure, it's cybersecurity, it's all of our data that we have a lot of residents here that wouldn't want that data to be exposed. So I think that risk calculation is a lot more critical than the ROI by itself. So if you could include that in your presentation, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, and then I'm going to, unless you've got a suggestion, I'm going for it. Talk more.
Usually that helps. So I probably would speak against this expenditure for a couple of reasons. One, it feels like we're in a time of financial contraction, certainly all around. We're seeing that on the operations side, and this feels like very much an open-ended expense. The other thing is, I think I am someone who understands the nuances of networks and data center and standing up our own infrastructure. And I feel like for us as a very, very small entity to put further investments in our own infrastructure when the world is moving to a different model of IT feels like maybe not the most advanced way to spend our very precious and limited dollars, particularly when we're in a position where we're saying, do I fix a dock that's super dangerous, or do I put in fiber optics? Like, it's not a choice anybody wants to make, but we're in a position where we're really being forced to make those kinds of decisions. So I would pass on this expenditure for similar but a different set of reasons as well.
Can I make a suggestion? Oh, Bruce,
Yep.
Go ahead, because Bruce is going to talk now.
Exactly.
And then I'm going to talk.
I don't have the depth of knowledge that the two of you probably have around this, but to Mike, help me a little bit, because there's clearly this move to the cloud of sort of data services that is happening. But I view that, and I'm hoping that you'll either correct me or support me on this, as somewhat, well, actually as quite different from the SCADA level kinds of things that we're doing, where we have our own pieces of equipment that we must be speaking to on a continuous basis, such that we're not spilling sewage into the lake or doing other kinds of things. And that, if I'm not mistaken, is not the kind of thing that's moving to the cloud in the same way. That's more infrastructural that has to remain in place. But please correct me if I'm wrong about that.
I think that is fair to say, and the city has been moving to the cloud for over maybe 5 or 6 years now, where it makes sense. The city will always need to have a network. we could move all of our software applications to, the cloud, but we still need a network to get there. You're right, things like SCADA, where we have pump stations and water reservoirs and things like that, we can't move those to the cloud, so we still need to communicate and monitor and control those, and so cloud strategy is something I will nerd out with you as much as you want. I know we don't have time tonight. I'm happy to go down how far down that road we've already gone, and how we view the cloud as it relates to our sort of overall strategy with technology here at the city. Government networks and government activities are pretty different than the private sector. SCADA is just one of those examples.
Benson, are you? Well, I was going to suggest, because again, we're not making decisions tonight, but clearly it's great to get the feedback. And, what I'm hearing right now is one element is a lack of information about, what your three descriptors, what does it mean to be responsive, resilient, and cost effective? Another element that's come up is this whole concept of cybersecurity. And I know that that is a to be scheduled session that we have. So what I think I'm going to suggest, if people are comfortable then, is either, coming back to us with, an email or a short white paper or something that is going to put these projects in context. I'd say the context that, that Bruce has raised and the context that Salim has raised. I mean, the one thing that when we had a conversation that I took away was what would be the impact of doing this or not doing this on our emergency preparedness. So in the event that the great quake or whatever does happen, and we have 2 emergency facilities at least, including the community center and town hall or city hall, what would this do for us or not do for us in that sense? So I don't know exactly what the outline of the email or the white paper or the something would be, but I think in order to help us make the right decision between go, no go, or partial go, context. I feel like I don't have a picture here, but that's me, myself and I. Benson?
Well, I will agree. I mean, I probably have the least knowledge about all this IT stuff that you guys have. Okay, so I'll admit to that. I rely heavily on my own IT people. And so I guess I would like to see a study session of some sort, because you are talking about policy issues. I'm concerned, as Councilmember Weicker mentioned, about risk issues. I'd like to know where our WCIA stands on these issues, and maybe they have an opinion as well. I have a question, though, and it's a timing question, okay? So if there are clearly some council folks who have already stated that, based upon the information that they are not terribly excited about putting this in the CIP. So the question is, if it's not in the CIP and we have this study session, is there a timing problem? I mean, I guess, I don't know when a study session can be scheduled, and if it happens after we have to approve the CIP, do we have a chance to come back, I suppose, to amend the CIP? I guess I'm looking to Chip and to Francie for some guidance, because there is a timing problem.
There is.
So.
And Mike, before we answer Benson's question, when does King County need to hear back from us regarding the design work? It's soon, right?
They were hoping to hear back from us a while ago. I think they've been great in terms of waiting and sort of, they're trying to work towards 90%, I think, by the end of this year. And they're looking for the city to give them at least a formal yes or at least in for design. At this time. Construction, I don't think, and I think Ann might have to correct me here, I think begins in 2021.
Yes.
So you still have exit paths from this project for a while. What we're trying to get simply is, can we continue to partner with King County along their timeline, which is to get to 90% design in the near term.
And for $99,000, not the full 3-something.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, Ben?
Well, I was just going to, so if the council decides to give you the go-ahead to continue the discussion, at what point in time do we have to actually write a check or, make a contribution to this process?
It'll be spread over the next, let's say, 6 to 8 months as King County incurs the design invoices. They would in turn invoice the city as that process.
So during that 6 to 8 month period, could we back out? Could we decide after we? Okay.
Yeah, I think in theory you could back out really. I mean, obviously, the design engineers in King County wouldn't, want that to happen, but I think we're looking for the full commitment before, King County would want the full commitment that, hey, you're in for the full design process, if I'm understanding your question.
So basically, we make the decision before the end of the year, and then they execute starting in 2019 over a period of 6 to 8 months. Is that?
I'm sorry, no, they are already trying to get to 90% design at the end of this.
Right, but we have to commit by the
I'm-
end of the year so that we meet their 90%.
They asked us to commit weeks ago. So we've been delaying them, trying to get in front of the council with your study session 2 weeks ago, and then tonight. I think I could delay them for another couple of weeks and just say, our council is continuing
Well,
to.
you'd have to delay a couple more weeks anyway, because we don't vote on this until November 20th anyway.
Yeah, and council, if I might, I'm concerned about talking too much about this, given the security involved, and obviously we have to protect a great deal of data. Maybe what we could do is, I've done this before, offer where we schedule time for two members of council to meet with staff to discuss I think it's fair to say kind of what's overall driving kind of our big picture. And having that conversation offline, I think is better and would protect, I think, the data and information that we need to protect. So if you wouldn't mind, I would suggest that I work with Mike, his team, come up with some times and see if we can't get you to come in over the course of the next couple weeks to meet with his staff and him to get the overview and for you to ask your questions in more details.
Super fast.
Yeah.
Super quick question. So at the end of my $365,000, are my buildings connected, or I just have conduit buried in the ground?
So that's a great question. So right now, the numbers that we know are 98,000 for design. We do not have specific numbers on construction. I'm anticipating that construction of the conduit and vaults for the King County element will be roughly the same as design. So let's call it 100,000. There are a couple of additional segments that need to be added to complete the entire path, and then a fiber cable needs to be put into that. So there are additional elements that I don't have specific numbers for you tonight, and I'm hesitant to just throw out guesstimates. But this number reflects, again, a variety of initiatives and me trying to tell the council that they're coming and that I need to get this on your radar. And I would appreciate just an opportunity to come back when I have specific numbers for you. But for this path here, King County, Mercer Island Community Center to City Hall, I anticipate somewhere around 300,000 to 500,000 at the end to make that connection complete.
Okay, so the answer is for $365,000, they're probably not connected, and there's more project left to go in order to everything's flowing.
Yeah, again, so it's hard for me to just guess.
Okay.
It's a little hard to guess.
But you're asking for $365,000. I'm saying, what do we get at the end of that spend? And you're saying not
Sure.
totally
You
sure.
get roughly 95% of that pathway. A pathway that will not open up like that until the next time King County replaces that same stretch some 75 years from now. And the likelihood of a pathway that aligns between two buildings that are as critical to our operations like these two, like I said, it's sort of unbelievable. It just doesn't, it's very surprising that you have this opportunity in front of you, so.
So Julie, I think we're going to go ahead and take you up on that offer? Okay. Thanks. I know that was probably a lot more than you anticipated about the IT systems on the island.
And just to be crystal clear, we really need to make a decision on November 20th, whether we're going forward with the design work or not. We've held off King County for a really long time. Okay. With that.
If I could, just if we could, I mean, I think I certainly, in having the conversation with with you offline. We'll be curious to understand better the alternative, the alternative being this existing system and that has the potential for being turned off. But that's, so yes, there's a plan here, but help us understand that too at the same time so that we understand option A and option B.
Mayor, I'm thinking this might be a good time for a break. Sewer's up next. I'm sensing.
Sure.
Yep, I think
Okay.
we've been up here a couple hours, so it is 8:14. We're going to try for 8:20? 6 minutes? Okay, Chip. We are ready.
Okay, folks, so the utilities are next, sewer, stormwater, followed by water. All these projects are funded by utility rates, not by REIT, not by taxes. I'll turn the time over to Jason.
Maybe, there we go. So with me to my right, we have Brian McDaniel, our Utilities Operation Manager. Next to him is Anton Hell, our Assistant City Engineer. And then on the end is Patrick Yamashita, our City Engineer. So tonight, we'll talk to you about the utilities. Real quickly, I would like to note that although we didn't have the June preview with the council, we have had a preview with the utility board. We had a utility board preview in August of this year. And then it was also revisited again during the September and October rate discussions that we had, that Francie touched on earlier. And these projects are in the proposed rates, which you'll hear again on the 20th, November 20th, correct? So, real quickly, all of the utilities are driven by their own master plan, essentially. So, on the sewer side, we have our general sewer plan, which Ann brought to you earlier this year in draft format. It's been sent off to the other agencies, and we expect to bring it back to the full council early in 2019. But the CIP breakdown for the sewer side follows the drafted sewer plan, general sewer plan. At a high level, we have over 110 miles of sewer mains, over 2,200 manholes, 18 pump stations, and just to remind you all, our sewage is shipped off island to King County where they treat it. So on that note, the subcategories for the sewer projects are in front of you. There's 15 total projects for just over 5.2 mil. We're going to talk about the SCADA replacement project at the end. That's the last slide, because it does touch both the sewer and the water. So bear with me on that. Again, it's the same format tonight. Funded and modified projects are in front of you. If there's any questions, please let me know. But again, you saw these during the draft general sewer plan, and they're outlined in the CIP. Okay. So new projects, again, we have the SCADA system identified at the bottom. That's going to be, again, that's going to be the last slide we talk about because it touches both water and sewer rates. Questions?
Council, any questions?
Okay. On the stormwater side, again, our CIP is focused on the comprehensive basin that was adopted in December of 2006. We complete basin condition assessments, so we do a physical assessment of the site, looking at the water courses and making sure that projects are reprioritized based off erosion and replanting things and replanting schemes for those specific basins. We have over 117 miles of stormwater pipe, over 7,200 catch basins on the stormwater side, and over 13 miles of water courses. In particular, for this upcoming CIP, we have 14 total projects on the stormwater side for totaling just over $2 million. Again, you're funded with projects with no changes and the modified funded. I'll just draw your attention real quickly to the modified Subbasin 10 dissolved metal source project. That's a grant-funded project in the town center. We're actually adding oyster shells to help with stormwater improvements. It's a pilot project.
When does that actually start?
It should be starting towards the end of the year or January, February timeframe.
So
So
the
very
end of this
soon.
year?
Mhm.
The shells were delivered to the shop here a couple weeks ago, so it's ramping up.
Cool. I mean, I'm kind of curious satisfied my curiosity. I mean, how big a pile of shells do we have?
I have not actually seen them. I just know they've arrived. I believe they're in sacks on a pallet in the warehouse right now. Do you know?
Send us a picture. That would be.
Okay.
Good. And then again, you have your modified projects. So recall on the stormwater side, we have quite a bit of permitting to go through. And a lot of times our projects are delayed because of permitting issues. through the other outside agencies. And so a couple of these projects have shifted due to timing because of those permitting delays. Okay, moving on to the water utilities. Again, our water system plan is what drives our capital reinvestment. We have over 115 miles of water mains, 2 4 million gallon reservoirs, an emergency well, 86 PRV stations, and then recall that water is provided via SPU via the Cedar and Tolt rivers. For this biennium, we have 16 total projects, just totaling over $10 million on the water utility side.
Dave, you're leaning forward.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Maybe it's a chip question, but the SCADA system shows up as a new expenditure, but we've been talking about it forever.
Sit tight, I'll get to that shortly.
Yes, sir.
So, and then on the recall on the water side, we have a list of substandard water mains. I think it's important to note that our substandard water mains is determined by a number of factors: age of pipe, size of pipe, maintenance history, and then post water advisory this last year. It's important to note that we added a water quality element to it as well. So we basically took water quality data and brought it over the top of the other data and reprioritized projects in substandard water mains, adding water quality as a component of it. So some of our projects shifted a little bit by adding that water quality component to it, but that's what makes up our substandard water mains. And then, yeah, so you can see the 2 projects here on the water side that are highlighted is the booster chlorination station, which is the next slide, and then our meter replacement program. So, ready? So our booster chlorination station, so again, post-water advisory, we've been in front of the council a handful of times now. This project was actually set for construction in this biennium. But as we got into the design, it's not necessarily just, there was some unexpected turns. It's not our typical water project that we do here. So the design was delayed, 1, because of the complexity, but 2, it also requires some integration. So one of the other projects we'll talk about shortly is the SCADA replacement. So SCADA was an important piece of the booster chlorination station. The 2 projects have to be integrated. Additionally, we have our reservoir generator replacement was also shifted. The generator is set to be replaced this year. Again, when you're adding new infrastructure to the reservoir, you have to make sure it's adequately sized. And so those different projects came into play in terms of the booster chlorination station, and it actually delayed the design of it. The design is at 90% complete, and it's scheduled to be constructed in 2019. So the scope change really was, there was an increase in cost, but it also moved out into the next biennium because of the complexities associated with it. I'll remind you, this was a post-water advisory recommendation from the Department of Health, and we continue to move forward with this project. Okay. And then next is our water meter replacement program. So our 3-year running average over water loss for the city is at a 10.6 per year average. Department of Health requires that anything over 10%, greater than 10% loss, we have a loss reduction program put in place. One of the areas to look at is our meters. There's currently over 7,866 water meters across the distribution system. Of that, approximately 65% are greater than 15 years old. We currently don't have a standard schedule for replacement, for inspection, testing, or the actual replacement of those meters. So this year we have had a project underway to actually evaluate our replacement strategy and what technologies, what types of meters are actually on the horizon. So this is actually scheduled to come to the utility board for discussion with the utility board in December of this year. And we fully expect to come back to the council in 2019. What you see proposed in the budget is a $500,000 placeholder for a pilot project, right? So replacing all the meters citywide, let's see what our return on investment is going to be. Let's see what types of, what's the data actually show in terms of how successful this is. So that's why you're seeing that $500,000 placeholder in 2019. And then we would come back to you later in 2019 with a discussion about issuing debt for a full replacement citywide or system-wide, spread across 2020 and 2021. So That's the $4 million that you see that will be debt financed, following, choosing of a meter, the technology, and actually seeing what the data shows.
And at that time, you'll go ahead and also talk to us, because I know several years ago, there was a discussion about the extent to which this would spread out over many, many years. And obviously, there's been a significant potential change, so you'll bring that up in the.
Absolutely. So that's part of the conversation actually is, where is that return on investment? What's the cost benefit analysis of doing it on a shorter window versus spreading it out over a 10, 15-year horizon? That'll be part of the conversation that we absolutely have. I can tell you that from the experience that we're seeing some of our other neighboring jurisdictions, they had that same approach, but the return on investment was so great, they've actually expedited replacement of their current, their system sooner. So, but that's a conversation we'll have.
Can you just touch on what is 10% loss in the volume and dollars?
Brian, go ahead.
The 10% loss, thanks for the assist, Jason. The 10% lost is effectively what was sold and what we purchased. So that's how we calculate the loss. So how much we purchased from SPU
But is
versus
that
how
a
much we
million
sold.
gallons? Is that 100,000 gallons? Is that, and then what does that cost us? Because we had to buy it and we didn't sell it, so.
That's a good question. I don't have the exact number in front of me. Actually, Francie might have a little bit of a thought on a cost for that.
The 10% dollar cost is probably about $200,000 a year, give or take.
And then I know you guys had talked about smart meter technology, which would reduce your operational costs, so not to conflate capital with operations, but do you have any kind of swag at what you think the operational cost reduction would be through smart meters?
We do not have an exact number pinched down on what the reduction would be. There's obviously trade-offs. You're going to trade staff time for actually reading meters versus the information that you'll gather from those meters. And we're currently right in the middle of that analysis to determine, when we start selecting the type of meter versus the type of technology that we talk to. And then those costs vary greatly from one manufacturer to the other. So over the next couple of months, we're hoping to ratchet that down to some specified technology. We can actually come back with some sharper numbers for you on that.
Yeah. Do you guys have a chart that shows us that loss getting up to 10.6? Has it just been a very linear and gradual crescendo to the I mean, we're talking about this because we're out of compliance, is that right?
Correct.
So has anybody discussed a solution that gets us just below 10% that doesn't involve $4.5 million of meter replacement?
So in terms of history, I can tell you it's bounced around a bit, but it has been above 10% for the last 3 years, right? And why it bounces around, we don't fully understand. But there are differences in timing between when Seattle does their meter readings on our master meter versus how we bill, and there's a lot of factors. Have we looked at how to just reduce down to below 10%? I'll let you guys take that, but yeah.
So part of this project, that's a great question. Part of this project and the scoping and fact-finding is exactly that. So we added an element to that consultant to say, okay, what exactly are the focus points for our water loss? Their initial brush right at this time it's pointing towards the meters. You want to replace your meters approximately every 20 years. And when our meters are greater than 15, we're approaching that point to replacing those. So it was kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will. But there's also the fact of the metering of the supply coming in. That comes into question when you start seeing losses move around. And specifically, when the flows go up, our loss goes up. When the flows go down, our accuracy increases. So it's really pointing towards meters, both on the billing side and on what we are receiving from Seattle Public Utilities. So that is part of the scope of that. And we'll be able to bring some of that back to you as well.
Okay. Other water utility projects, and then we're going to quickly quickly get into SCADA here. So I'll just make note too, you have 2 abandoned projects listed there. So recall, we've added water quality analysis to our operations regularly. I mean, it's nearly tripled in terms of our data collection points. With it, it quickly identifies some maybe unnecessary redundancies in our water system. And so these 2 particular pipes were flagged because of water quality numbers. And we're like, why are these here? And it identified that they're a redundant line that actually, when the other asset was reinvested, the other pipe wasn't abandoned back in the day. And so it's a little bit of cleanup work on those 2 projects, but it's something that has to be done. So those are new projects.
When we abandon a pipe, do we remove it or do we just shut it down?
We,
Typically, in the past, we have left it in the ground and just cut and capped it off. So it's effectively a conduit in the ground.
and it's flagged, EnergyEye system. Okay. SCADA. So I talked a little bit about this at the operating budget. So SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition and Telemetry Systems. Currently, our SCADA system supports both our water and our sewer utilities. So that's why you're seeing at the end of our presentation tonight, is because it's funded both from the water and the sewer side proportionally. As we've talked about numerous times with the utility board, which Councilmember Wiesenthaler was part of the utility board for many of these conversations, this has been an ongoing issue that was brought really back in 2017 as we've started to roadmap what we're going to do to replace this system, or systems, I should say. Last year we went through a master planning process for the SCADA system. What does it actually look like? Do we continue to keep it on 2 separate systems? Or do we have one system that supports both the water and the sewer utilities? And then what's the overall cost associated with this? And so we went through a pretty laborious exercise on the staff side, identified the technology platform that we want to use moving forward for both the water and the sewer utilities. With that planning exercise, we got a very high conceptual dollar amount of what it's going to cost to replace the entire SCADA system. And so the numbers that are proposed in your budget number are those high-level dollars associated with replacing the entire SCADA system. I will say that those numbers are very, very large, but they're conceptual. So in 2019, we have money set aside to hire a consultant because we don't have the technical expertise on staff to actually come in and design the system. So in 2019, you'll see a team come in, design the system, actually put together a refined engineer's estimate and construction cost that we will come back to you in 2019 with an updated number that then we can talk about a debt financing scenario. The SCADA system is obsolete. There are cybersecurity concerns. There is risk concerns that we need to address it. We've taken, through Mike and his team's help, we've done some short-term measures to sort of bridge us to where we are today, but we are at a point where we need to replace this system to continue to operate our 2 utilities. With that, Councilmember Wiesenthaler's been part of those conversations. Mayor Bertland's been part of those conversations with the utility board. It's not an exciting topic, but it's a really, really important topic for the operations and maintenance of our systems.
Dave?
Just because I always sometimes say things in the negative, I'll say you've heard me say this before, I think this is a great investment and it lasts a long time. And frankly, I don't know how you guys do what you do today because you somehow use your spidey senses to detect that a sewer pump is dead in the water somewhere where you have to take a boat to it. So, when do you bring up risk a lot? And I think that's absolutely the right thing to key in on. And when we don't have any idea that a sewer pump has jammed on a diaper and it's right next to a $10 million house, that is a risk that gets us into deep financial trouble very quickly. So this, to me, as an insurance policy, is great. And I just wanted to say, you guys have been so thorough and so careful about how you've figured the answer to this equation out, knowing that there's not zillions of dollars to spend. So just super appreciative for the process that you've gone through and how now that it's come to us, it's like a very predictable, oh, we all know what that's about. So wanted to say thank you for that. Good.
You should probably stop now.
That concludes the
Oh, so that
BIPA
does
project
conclude.
review. That's the last slide for that.
Except, Benson. Oh,
I
sorry.
just want to say kudos to our utility board, because I think you get a lot of expertise there from people in the field that absolutely know that stuff inside and out. So kudos for you for bringing those people together and working through the numbers and the math and the complicated engineering that goes into all this. So, amen, well done. I second Dave.
The utility board gets all the glamorous stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to take us home. Last
All
few
right.
slides. Literally. No. Okay, outstanding bonds. This relates to parks and buildings. And this is important in terms of identifying when money that is used, tax money, to fund the annual debt service gets freed up. Now, in the fire station and fire rescue truck, that debt, the last year of that is 2021. That's also the last year of the levy lid lift, which is the funding source for the annual debt service. So there's no benefit, once that ends, that the funding source also goes away. However, South Mercer Playfields, the annual debt service is only $88,000 and change, but the last year of that is 2022. The funding source is sales tax from the general fund, so it frees up a little bit of money there beginning then.
Sorry, but
Yes.
there's also a sinking fund associated with that. Because is that the turf element, or is that?
No, this was, we issued debt for a combination of the South Mercer Playfields and the Sewer Lake Line. It was a $10 million or so bond issue. This was a fairly smaller piece of that. And so,
What did we actually buy of the South Mercer, or what did we do there?
wasn't this the turf?
It was the turf. So there is a sinking fund, so we don't need to worry,
There's-
because then, once this is retired, there's a sinking fund that will cover the replacement of the turf if and when needed.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the community center, the building, that debt had been refunded, but it's the annual debt service is about $138,000. Its final year is 2023. The funding source for that is REIT, and Rancy's already taken that into account in the 6-year CIP.
Sorry,
Yes, sir.
I know you've told me this before, so it's just my advanced age that's hurting me. What do we do to the community center on an annual basis that's so expensive? On a capital standpoint?
We built it.
Sorry.
Isn't that's the debt service on
Is
the?
that the debt service on the whole building?
Debt service on the building.
Got it, sorry.
No worries. Okay, we have one budget policy change as it relates to CIP. And this has been a longstanding policy where REIT is split 50-50. Then remember, there's two components to REIT. REIT 1, the first quarter percent, and REIT 2, the second quarter percent. REIT 1 has fewer strings attached to it by comparison. REIT 2 is more constrained. REIT cannot be used for technology nor equipment. What we're proposing is, in terms of balancing the various funding needs, is reducing the REIT for the street fund, so total REIT that gets 45% beginning in 19, and the balance of 55% would go to the capital improvement fund. Okay, now that I'm sure begs the question, does that negatively impact the street fund? For the coming 6-year period, its fund balances are fine. Yes, they decline over time, but the street fund, there's no impact on planned projects in the coming 6-year period. The fund balance is fine at the end of the 6-year period. We have a greater funding need on the capital improvement fund side, where we're using a portion of that, or in 19 and 20, we're using the REIT increase, dedicating it to the open space vegetation management project due to the prevailing wage issue, okay? But after 2020, so the remaining 4 years of the CIP, that's needed for public buildings and other parks projects. I sense questions.
Yeah, Chip, it's one of your earlier slides when you're showing the street fund being fully, no deficits. And
Yeah.
so, do those numbers for the street fund reflect this
Yes.
change in the
Yeah.
allocation?
The budget that's before you assumes this change.
I see, thank you.
Question also, the street fund, if we were to find, or a future council were to find themselves in a situation where for some reason there were insufficient funds, they still have the,
Vehicle license fee
yes, thank you.
could increase it by another $20.
Another $20 per vehicle.
That's $375,000 a year.
Can we use any REIT for that plan that Jesse so desperately needs?
Sorry, we can't.
Nothing.
I wish we
Okay.
could. That's one of the things I want the legislature to do is to remove some of the restrictions on REIT 1 and REIT 2. I'm not the only one. Many other cities want that. Just open it up to planning and technology and equipment and maintenance.
I think we get to hit that one in our legislative priorities, yeah. And put an extra star.
Questions on this? Okay. Guess what? We've reached the end, and so I got my notes. Julie has her notes. Francie has her notes. I think we know what the follow-up in terms of what you want to revisit on the November 20th. Beyond what Julie mentioned on the discussion with Mike in terms of arranging for meetings with council members who are interested to talk about the network connectivity and the fiber project in particular, we'll provide that more information directly. Vegetation management.
2019.
But,
looking at how we handled 2019, given all the unknowns.
yeah.
So just for fun, and since we've talked about it before, do you want to talk about the plans for replacing the maintenance building, or lack thereof?
Sure. And so, Francie, we have a little bit of design money in the out years, I recall, is it 2024? 2024, but there is no ability to fund the replacement of that building in the coming 6-year period. We just have the design money. As I've mentioned to the council before, options include, maybe not the best of options, when the fire station levy lid lift ends in 2021, there's the potential to go back out to the public for various funding for capital projects. I don't know that the maintenance center would rise to the top, right, in terms of getting public support, because there's other needs that are out there. I should also mention that in terms of funding, if we ever do go forward on that project, the utility rates would fund 50% of the cost. The balance had to be funded by taxes. And so that's where you look for opportunities for surplus REIT because a $100 million property is sold or that kind of thing, for example. I will also mention a Plan B. I've mentioned this to the deputy mayor and I think maybe a few others, but a Plan B is, remember, we have a service package we talked about at the operating budget review. Well, we're looking at certain departments. One of them is the municipal court. And would it make sense to contract with City of Kirkland or some other agency, right, for court services? So thereby freeing up the physical space of the court and to help solve some of our space problems. And that would buy us time. And so that's out there as a possibility that we're looking at as well. Any other information needs for the council? Any other questions? Okay, folks. Thank you.
All right. All right. Council, so we now, in theory, have the vast majority or the majority of information that we need as we approach November 20th, which was actually when decision-making time hits for both operating and for the capital. So obviously, we have an important night tomorrow night. And Wednesday morning, I think we'll all need to be pulling out our books and figuring out what that means. So with that, the next item of business is AB 5496, which is the draft 2019 state legislative priorities. And for that, I believe Julie will be talking us through. Oh, Ally?
She punted. I mean, she assigned me this.
She gave it to the person with the greatest competence to handle the matter in front.
So we don't have a formal presentation for you this evening, but we do have the actual document up here on the screen. What we're looking for tonight is feedback on the categories that we have presented, as well as if there's any information within here that you have heartache with, would like removed, or would like added. And then we will be bringing this back to you on November 20th on the consent calendar for adoption. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Council, any discussion? I think what I would point out is we have the council's legislative priorities, and I think Wendy made a great point. It was probably now almost 2 months ago, insofar as really bringing it down to that which we as a council wanted to focus on, that we as a council felt that we could influence, and that it would notably impact our community. There's clearly some that impact those beyond the island, but we wanted to make sure that our efforts and energies would actually have tangible ramifications for our residents. Also, in this packet, we have a number of other documents, which includes the Sound Cities Draft Associations, or sorry, Sound Cities Draft 2019 Agenda. We have ETP, we have King County Cities and AWC, et cetera. The only one that I think where we would be taking feedback is ETP. I think, Benson, are you done with Sound Cities? Yeah. Okay. And everyone else, I think we've already had our window of opportunity. So in front of us is really what the city's ledge priorities are, and then if anybody has any comments about ETP, I'm happy to take those either here or offline. So, any comments, council members? Or Ally, you wanna?
I'll just,
Yeah.
well, I'll just say that I came a little late to this party because you'd had a previous conversation about these, I believe, and I was pleased with what I saw here, and I'm ready to give it a thumbs up.
I do want to give Councilmember Wong some credit. He did rework the original draft that we had emailed out to you and added in number 4 and number 5 to call out more specifically health and property tax requirements for seniors, veterans, and disabled residents. So thank you, Councilmember Wong.
And that's relating to the legislation? Yes. Okay. Senate Bill 6251. All right, well, with that amount of robust feedback, Ally, anything you want to add?
No,
Or
I was
we
just
can
going
look
to
for a
say, if you're
motion.
happy with them and you don't have changes, we could just adopt them
We could
tonight.
just have a motion.
So it's up to you.
So, Bruce, this is for you. Number 6, if 1631 passes, or how do these priorities affect those changes? Might want to wait, or has council supported 1631?
Council has supported 1631. 6A is a statewide price on carbon with a reinvestment of a substantial portion of revenues into an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is in alignment with 1631, I believe. And so I think all is well was my impression of this and looking at that. Are you thinking there might be something you want to do that's sort of an if-then, if
Right,
1630?
so if 1631 passes, is there more specific work in this area that we want to do? Or just leave it because we can assume the legislator will pick it up? Right, done. Legislature doesn't have to do anything. Is there anything more specific that the K4C wants to ask above and beyond,
Well,
or to supplement, or implement?
Certainly the K4C has a bunch of other information that's here. But I think, my impression was that this does a pretty good job in B, C, D, and E of capturing those other objectives that the K4C is looking to. So it's, the reduced carbon fuel standard, it's the ending coal as a power source as early as possible, and so I think this does a pretty good job of capturing those things. Is there something you're thinking it might be missing here? Because there might be, but
There may or there may not be, and I know you like to have that, I know our mayor likes to have that flexibility to
Yeah.
sign on to letters that may or may not be very specific, so.
And, Councilmember Weicker, the first sentence, or the second sentence of that, it says, "We encourage legislation and partnerships that support progressive clean energy, climate protection, or other environmental health measures to achieve the following." We could, including, not limited to, but including the following. I think, our Communications and Sustainability Manager, Ross Freeman, spent a good deal of time taking the K4C agenda and kind of reducing it down into these specific 5 issues. Buckets, yes. But we could make that statement at the top a little more broad if.
I'll just leave it. I just wanted to ask the question.
Okay.
Well, the good news is the vote is tomorrow night, and I misspoke. We actually don't need a motion. This is actually just direction for any modifications, and it comes back to us, I believe, probably on consent.
Yes, and I was just saying that if you don't have any changes and you don't
Yeah.
want to further make changes, we can just adopt tonight.
So
So
you could just
if
make a
anybody has-
motion.
I guess, well, I wouldn't encourage it because we would want it to stay on consent. If there's any brilliant ideas in the next week or so, you could always share them out.
Question on the other end, which is, do we do anything to sort of gauge how effective our legislators have been at prosecuting our agenda? Do we get a?
Well, I think there's an indirect, there's a results of like our 2018 in here, but you mean if we look at Rep 1, Rep 2, and Senate position and individually score them? That I haven't seen, I'm not quite sure how we would do it.
We did try to provide at least some summary of the last session and how successful we were. I think another opportunity, we started this last year when I came aboard, but the visit that we have with the 41st delegation, I find those helpful in them highlighting what they have achieved. They're very aware of your priorities, and we will have an opportunity to meet with them on November 26th. So that's another, I think, a place where we can hear from them how successful they think they were in the last session, and then what they think are the priorities going into the next session. There's no like report card concept out there that I'm aware of.
And we are also doing this earlier so that we're not giving our final draft to our legislators in January. We're giving it to them in November, and we'll actually get to sit and discuss it with them on November 26th. So.
I just, in partial response to Dave, I would just say, looking at the letter that we got from WashDOT, for example, there was, I think, woven, this letter represents some tremendous work that our legislators have gone to bat for us, particularly on this parcel 12 issue.
And if there is no objection, I mean, it would save us actually staff time if you would.
Yeah, I was going to say
consider
that one of the things that, in talking to our delegation, they've said is the earlier the better. And if we have the comfort level tonight, I would make a motion. Okay. Well, I move to adopt Agenda Bill 5496.
Second.
Then first and second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That was a very efficient move. Cool. Thanks, Al. And thank you, Benson, for working on that and untangling that. That's great. So we now move to other business. Any upcoming council member absences to report?
Oh, I won't be at the one this week. I'm traveling.
So reminder, we have school board Thursday night.
In fact, we will be able to share with them your newly adopted legislative priorities, since that is on the agenda.
Will they have theirs?
Not that I'm aware of, yeah.
Okay. All right, so with that, we then move to the planning schedule.
And as you mentioned, we have a joint meeting with the school board. We're talking about their budget, our legislative priorities, and they would also like to update us on their facilities and transportation plan. And then we want to just update you on some of the staff-to-staff work that's progressed in the area of inclusive community, welcoming community. And so we'd like to just update you on that. And there's some work that still needs to be done on that, but really start to get your thoughts about how to move that effort forward. So those are the agenda items. We're meeting here at 4:45, and we have to wrap up by 6 since they have a board meeting. So that item, and then Deb just told me that you should have your packets for that meeting on the dais available to you. And then I think one thing to note is you are hosting Representative Judy Claiborne on November 26th, a reception to really honor her, and she is retiring. And so in advance of your meeting with the 41st delegation, from 5:30 to 6:30, we invite the public to come out and share their appreciation to Representative Claiborne.
Okay.
If we could, I know, I can't remember, since I've been gone for a while, somehow, in some fashion, I was informed that former mayor, former Senator Fred Jarrett was hoping to be here and probably say a few words at that. It'd be good if we made sure that we sent out invitations to former electeds like that.
Ally's been working on it.
Good, folks who worked with Judy in particular, because I think for them it'll be particularly nice to, be able to, sort of close out that career and have things to say.
We will have a loose program, so we are looking for folks to make remarks. So that's a good one. And if you know of others that you think would love to be part of the program, let us know.
Yeah, like I say, particularly folks who served at around the same time she served on council, and would be great.
Okay, so with that, we have no board appointments this evening, and we'll move to council member reports. So we'll start at this end. Nothing. Benson.
Just mention that it's passed already, but the Mercer Island Schools Foundation had their two-day phone-a-thon. I don't know how successful it was, but they had a lot of volunteers, and what was interesting is that they actually had a number of high school students who were making phone calls, and I think that went pretty well. I will also say that the PIC, the Public Issues Committee, they're having a pre-PIC meeting this Wednesday on social media and how elected officials might want to interact with social media, Nextdoor and Facebook and what have you. So I will bring back whatever guidance or any other tips that they might share. Yeah, at 6 o'clock down in Renton. And Bruce, I think you were the one who put that little bug in their ear, so, okay, all right.
Back just
Okay.
in time.
Yeah, great, okay.
Social media is having a significant impact on public confidence in elected officials, and for us to be sharing best practices as cities and trying to figure out how it's being best handled is, I think, a valuable conversation for us to be having.
All right, so Salim, Bruce, you can tell us about your river rafting trip.
The Grand Canyon is very nice at this time of year.
Okay, Dave. On my part, just a couple words. First of all, thanks to those of you who quickly chimed in support of the statement that we put out on behalf of the families, victims, and those who are suffering from the tragedy in Pittsburgh. I'll be moderating a D&I panel for the Enterprise Risk Forum this week, which should be interesting. And if you could all please send and/or confirm to me the boards and commissions that you applied for from Sound City. So thank you, Benson. I have yours. That would be great. I don't think we had any conflicts. But otherwise, that is it. So with that, council's adjourned. 9:05.